My name's Caleb, and not too long ago, I thought I had it all. A steady job, good friends, and a girlfriend I planned to spend my life with. But then, one night, everything changed. I asked her a simple question. Who is Richard? She didn't hesitate. She didn't even look guilty. She just smiled and said, "He's my boss." And yeah, I've been sleeping with him for months. And if that wasn't enough, she added, "I need a real man, Caleb. Someone with ambition. Not someone who wastes weekends playing video games." 3 years together, just gone. But what hit me hardest wasn't just the cheating. It was everything that came after. The friends who took her side, the lies she spread online, the way she turned my entire life into a joke while I stood there, watching it burn. And that's just the beginning. Because when I walked away that night, I had no idea I was about to lose everything. My reputation, my job, even the people I thought I could trust. But what if I told you that losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to me? What happened next? What did I do when I had nothing left? You're about to find out. I sat alone in the dimly lit apartment, the sound of the city outside muffled by the thick walls. It had been like this for weeks now. Lauren coming home later and later, her excuses piling up like unread messages on my phone. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. But something had shifted between us, something subtle yet undeniable. At first, it was little things. A new perfume I didn't recognize, the way she angled her phone away when she texted, the sudden distance in her touch. I had convinced myself it was work stress, the natural ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. We'd been together for 3 years. Doubt wasn't supposed to creep in this late, but it did. I tried to push it down, to ignore the uneasy feeling in my gut. When she pulled away from my embrace, I told myself she was just tired. When she started spending more nights out with friends I'd never met, I assured myself she needed space. And when she stopped saying, "I love you" first, I told myself I was imagining things. Then, one night, the truth revealed itself. Not in an explosive argument or a dramatic confession, but in the quiet buzz of a phone screen. Lauren's phone was on the coffee table while she showered, its screen lighting up in the darkened room. I wasn't the jealous type. I never had been. But when I glanced down and saw the message, something inside me broke. "Miss you already. Last night was incredible. Richard." My chest tightened. My mind raced. I told myself there had to be an explanation. But there was none, not one that wouldn't shatter everything we had built. I had a choice. I could ignore it, pretend I never saw it, and let things continue the way they had been. Or I could confront her. When Lauren walked through the kitchen later that night, casually making herself a smoothie like nothing had changed, I knew what I had to do. "Who is Richard?" I asked, my voice steady, but my hands clenched at my sides. She didn't even flinch, no guilt, no shame. Just a slow, knowing smirk as she turned to face me. "My boss," she said, taking a sip of her drink. "And yes, I've been sleeping with him for 2 months." The cold, casual way she admitted it hit harder than the betrayal itself. There was no remorse in her eyes, no sign of hesitation. She had made her decision long before I had even suspected. I stared at her, waiting for something. An apology, an explanation, anything to make sense of this. Instead, she leaned against the counter, tilting her head slightly. "I need a real man, Caleb," she said smoothly. "Someone ambitious, not someone who spends weekends playing video games with his friends." The words cut deep, not because they were true, but because they were designed to hurt. And for a moment, they did. But then, something unexpected happened. The pain gave way to something else. Clarity. I reached for my phone, my hand steady as I typed out a message to Scott, my closest friend. Maybe I wasn't ready to deal with Lauren, but I needed someone on my side. "Did you know?" I sent. The reply came almost instantly. "Man, maybe it's time you wake up. Lauren deserves someone who can provide for her." I stared at the message, my stomach twisting. Before I could process it, another notification popped up, this time from Megan. "We didn't want to hurt you, but yeah, we all kind of saw this coming." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Not only had I lost Lauren, I had lost them all. I looked up at her, standing there so sure of herself, waiting for a reaction. She wanted anger. She wanted a fight. She wanted a dramatic, messy breakup, so she could paint herself as the victim later. Instead, I smiled. Without a word, I turned and walked to the bedroom, grabbing the small bag I always kept packed for weekend trips. I slung it over my shoulder, grabbed my keys, and walked back out. Lauren was watching me, confusion flickering across her face. "Where are you going?" she demanded. I paused at the door, glancing back just once. "Out," I said simply. Then, after a beat, "And Lauren? Keep the apartment. I'm sure Richard can help with the rent." Her mouth opened to respond, but I didn't stick around to hear whatever excuse or insult she had lined up next. I stepped outside, shutting the door behind me with a finality that echoed through the empty hallway. As I got into my car and pulled away, my phone buzzed with messages. I turned it off. The city lights blurred past as I drove with no destination in mind. But for the first time in months, I felt something unexpected. Relief. The air in the motel room was stale, the faint scent of cigarette smoke clinging to the walls, no matter how many times I cracked open the window. The hum of the ancient air conditioner filled the silence, but it did nothing to quiet the thoughts spiraling in my head. I laid on the stiff mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling, replaying the past few days over and over like a bad movie I couldn't turn off. Lauren's smirk, the casual way she had confessed, the betrayal in Scott and Megan's words. My phone sat face down on the nightstand, buzzing intermittently like an insect I refused to swat. I had shut it off 2 days ago, unwilling to deal with the fallout. But the longer I ignored it, the more the weight of the unknown pressed against my ribs. Finally, I gave in. The screen lit up with 32 missed calls, 47 unread messages, Lauren, Scott, Megan, even numbers I didn't recognize. I hesitated before opening Lauren's messages first. "Caleb, I need to talk to you. Why are you acting like a child? Running away doesn't fix anything." "Don't ignore me." "Fine, have it your way." I moved to the next name on the list, Scott. "Man, you're making this worse than it has to be. You need to let this go." "Lauren's moving on. Maybe you should too." I exhaled sharply, my grip tightening on the phone. But it was Megan's texts that made my stomach churn. "I can't believe you're doing this to her. I always thought you were better than this. You have no idea how much you hurt her." I blinked at the words. Hurt her? What kind of twisted reality had they built while I was gone? A creeping sense of unease settled in my chest. I needed to know what was happening. I opened Instagram. Lauren's most recent post was a close-up of her, eyes red-rimmed, looking heartbroken. The caption beneath it sent a cold chill down my spine. I just got out of a toxic, controlling relationship. It took me years to find the courage to leave. To anyone who has ever been in an emotionally abusive relationship, I hear you. I stand with you. I scrolled down, my pulse hammering. Hundreds of comments flooded the post, filled with sympathy, encouragement, support. Scott had commented, "Proud of you for standing up for yourself, Lauren. You deserve better." Megan, "We all saw how unhappy you were. Stay strong, girl." There it was. The narrative had been rewritten. Lauren wasn't the one who cheated, who lied. I was the villain now. I clenched my jaw so hard it ached. The sheer audacity of it made my hands tremble. But before I could process it, my phone buzzed again. Naomi. "Hey, you might want to check your email. Something's going around at work about you." A sinking feeling settled in my gut. I switched to my inbox and saw it immediately. A company-wide email. "At company name, we are committed to a safe, respectful workplace. Any reports of inappropriate behavior will be taken seriously. No names, no direct accusations." But the timing, it wasn't a coincidence. I barely had time to process it before my phone rang. My manager. I hesitated before answering, already knowing where this was going. "Caleb," he said, his tone forced into something neutral. "We just want to check in. There have been concerns." Concerns? A polite way of saying that Lauren's lies were reaching my workplace. "Everything is fine," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Of course, just wanted to make sure. You know, company culture is very important to us." I barely heard the rest of what he said. My mind was already racing. Lauren wasn't just trying to ruin my personal life. She was going after my career. I needed air. I grabbed my keys and drove without thinking, ending up at the storage unit where I had kept some of my old things. That's when I saw her. "Juliana, one of Lauren's old friends. She hesitated when she saw me, looking over her shoulder as if making sure no one was watching. Then she took a step closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Caleb, be careful." I frowned. "What? This isn't the first time?" I stared at her, my pulse hammering. "What do you mean?" She glanced around again before lowering her voice. "Before you, there was another guy. Lauren and Richard did the same thing to him. He lost his job, his reputation, everything, and then disappeared. The air left my lungs. She didn't just cheat," Juliana continued. "She destroys people, Caleb, and if you don't stop her, she's going to do the same thing to you." I drove back to the motel in silence, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. Lauren had never just been careless or selfish. She had been calculating. This wasn't about a failed relationship. It wasn't even about revenge. She wanted to erase me. A slow, burning anger replaced the heartbreak that had weighed me down for days. I wasn't just going to sit back and let her win. If she wanted a war, she was going to get one. I woke up to the sound of distant traffic and the hum of the motel's air conditioner. For the first time in days, my head wasn't clouded with grief or confusion. There was no lingering hope that Lauren would call, no urge to check my phone for messages from Scott or Megan. The sadness that had weighed me down since I walked out of that apartment was still there, but it had changed. It had hardened into something sharper. Anger had taken its place, but not the kind that burned out quickly in a fit of rage. This was different. This was controlled, strategic. Juliana's words echoed in my head. This wasn't just a bad breakup. It was a deliberate, calculated attempt to erase me, and I had let it happen, walking away as if that would be enough to stop Lauren and Richard from taking everything I had left. I sat up, running a hand over my face. No more waiting, no more hoping that the truth would reveal itself. If they wanted to destroy me, they were going to have to try a lot harder. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found Naomi's name, the one person at work who had warned me that something was happening behind my back. I hesitated only for a second before typing, "I need to talk. In person." Her response was almost immediate. "Meet me at Mel's Diner, 30 minutes. I grabbed my keys and left without looking back. The diner was nearly empty when I arrived, just a few scattered booths occupied by truckers and night shift workers nursing their coffee. Naomi was already there, sitting at a booth in the back, her expression unreadable. She didn't waste time with small talk when I slid into the seat across from her. "You're in deeper than you think," she said, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "Lauren and Richard aren't just trying to ruin your reputation. They're making sure you never work in this city again." I clenched my jaw but said nothing. She sighed, setting her spoon down. "People at the office are talking. Richard's been covering for Lauren, making sure she looks innocent while making you out to be the villain. And it's working. A lot of them believe her. They think you're bitter and trying to drag her down." I exhaled slowly. It wasn't surprising, but hearing it confirmed made my blood boil. "There's a company event coming up," Naomi continued. "Big charity thing. Richard's supposed to speak. A lot of important people are going to be there." I raised an eyebrow. "And why does that matter?" "Because it's your chance to expose him." I leaned back in the booth, considering her words. Richard was careful. He was powerful. If I made one wrong move, he'd spin it against me like he had with everything else. "You need to be careful," Naomi warned. "Richard isn't just some random boss. He has connections. He's not afraid to ruin people." A few days ago, that would have made me hesitate. But now, I smirked. I've already lost everything. What else can they take from me? Naomi studied me for a moment before nodding. "Then, let's do this right." Back at the motel, I sat on the bed with my laptop, digging through every scrap of information I could find about Richard. That's when I remembered what Juliana had said. Before me, there was someone else, someone who had been through this same nightmare. I searched for any mention of a former employee tied to a scandal involving Richard. After a while, one name kept appearing, Mark Henderson. I frowned, clicking through old articles. He had worked for Richard's company years ago, but had disappeared from the industry after a vague misconduct accusation. No details, no follow-up. I hesitated for a second before dialing the number I found on an old LinkedIn profile. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Who is this?" I took a breath. "Mark, my name is Caleb. I think we have something in common." There was silence on the other end, then a low sigh. "You're not the first, Caleb, and you won't be the last, unless we stop them." A slow, determined smile crept onto my face. Then let's stop them. Driving back to the motel, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. I wasn't running away anymore. I wasn't the victim in this story. Lauren and Richard thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming. The drive to the coffee shop felt longer than it should have. My fingers gripped the steering wheel, my mind replaying the short but loaded conversation with Mark. I had no idea what to expect. Part of me wondered if he would even show up. Maybe he had moved on, left all of this behind, and I was just reopening a wound he wanted to forget. But when I pulled into the parking lot, there he was, seated at a table by the window, his back straight, his eyes scanning the lot as if expecting trouble. I stepped inside, the scent of burnt coffee mixing with cheap vanilla air fresheners. Mark didn't smile, didn't offer a handshake, just nodded toward the seat across from him. I sat down, my pulse steady, but my mind racing. He studied me for a moment before speaking. "Let me guess. She told everyone you were controlling and abusive?" A chill ran down my spine. I didn't answer right away, but Mark took my silence as confirmation. He let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "Yeah. Same script, different guy." My stomach tightened. This wasn't just some toxic relationship gone wrong. This was a pattern. Mark leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his jaw. "I should have spoken up sooner. I should have warned you." I didn't know what to say to that. I wasn't sure it would have made a difference. "She met me before Richard," Mark continued. "We were together for almost 2 years. She was charming, smart. She made you feel like the luckiest guy in the world." I knew that feeling all too well. "But when she was done, she didn't just leave." His voice darkened. "She made sure I couldn't pick myself back up afterward." I leaned forward. "What did she do?" Mark sighed. "She started planting seeds at work, subtle things, comments about how I had a temper, that I made her uncomfortable sometimes. Then, suddenly, I was being investigated for things I never did." I clenched my jaw. "She wasn't working alone," Mark continued. "Richard was pulling strings behind the scenes, making sure those rumors stuck." "And then what?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Mark's eyes met mine, something raw behind them. "Then, I lost my job, my reputation, everything." My pulse pounded in my ears. "How many others were there?" I asked. Mark exhaled sharply. "I don't know, but I know I wasn't the first, and I sure as hell won't be the last unless we stop them." Something inside me clicked into place. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't just reacting. I wasn't just trying to survive. I was fighting back. Mark hesitated before leaning in slightly. "I still have something they don't know about. Emails, messages, proof I straightened." "What kind of proof?" He pulled out his phone, tapping through old files before turning the screen toward me. The first screenshot was of a conversation between Lauren and an unknown number. "Lauren, it's too easy. People believe whatever I tell them." Unknown. "And Caleb? Lauren, he won't see it coming. None of them ever do." A wave of nausea rolled through me. I swiped to the next image, an email thread between Richard and another executive. "Richard, Henderson is a liability. I want him out quietly." Executive, "Understood. I'll start the process." I looked at Mark. "They planned your downfall." He nodded. "And they're doing the same thing to you." I took a breath, forcing the anger inside me to settle. This was it. This was the leverage we needed. "For the first time," I muttered, "I have something real, not just words, undeniable proof." Mark nodded. "So, the question is, what do we do with it?" I thought about the upcoming company event Naomi had mentioned, about Richard standing in front of a room full of executives, completely unaware that his empire was about to crumble. "We time it right," I said. "We expose them when they least expect it." Mark smirked. "I like the way you think." We spent the next hour planning, going over every detail, making sure when the moment came, they wouldn't be able to spin their way out of it. As I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt something I hadn't in weeks: hope. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about winning. Sitting on the edge of the motel bed, I scrolled through the screenshots Mark had sent me. The messages between Lauren and Richard were damning, but they weren't enough. People like Richard didn't fall because of whispers and accusations. They fell because of proof. Real, undeniable, irrefutable proof. And that meant I needed more than Mark's screenshots. I needed something from inside Richard's company, something that couldn't be spun as just another bitter ex-employee with an agenda. I needed someone on the inside. I thought about my options. Most of my former coworkers had already taken sides, Lauren's side, but there was one person who might still be willing to help me, Naomi. She had always been sharp, skeptical. She wasn't someone who bought into office gossip easily. And she was in IT, meaning if there were any digital skeletons in Richard's closet, she could find them. I hesitated for only a second before sending a message. Naomi, I need your help. A minute passed, then another. I was about to toss my phone onto the bed when it buzzed. Meet me after work, usual spot. I exhaled. This was it. Mel's diner was dimly lit, the neon sign flickering outside as I waited in the back booth. When Naomi walked in, she didn't greet me right away. Instead, she scanned the room, her expression tense, before sliding into the seat across from me. Talk fast, she said, keeping her voice low. I leaned forward. I need access to Richard's emails, his company records, anything that proves what he's been doing. She blinked, her mouth tightening. And you think I can just get that? You're in IT, I said simply. Naomi let out a short, humorless laugh. Yeah, and that means I know how risky what you're asking is. She shook her head. Caleb, if I do this, I could lose everything. I didn't blame her for hesitating. I would have done the same in her position. But before I could say anything, she sighed. But my breath caught. I always thought something was off about Lauren, she admitted. The way she turned everyone against you so fast, the way Richard covered for her. It never sat right with me. I sat up straighter. Then you believe me? She hesitated, then nodded. I believe you enough to find out the truth for myself. Relief flooded through me. For the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. And that changed everything. Over the next few days, Naomi worked carefully, accessing files little by little, covering her tracks as she went. She sent me updates through encrypted messages, each one revealing just how deep Richard's corruption ran. She found hidden expense reports, company funds funneled into private accounts, covering Richard's business trips with Lauren. She found conversations between Richard and senior executives discussing which employees needed to be removed before they became a problem. She found emails from Lauren herself, pushing for my firing, fabricating complaints, twisting reality to make me look unstable. When she sent me the final batch of files, her message was simple. This is enough to bury him, but you need to be smart about how you use it. I stared at the files on my screen, my mind racing. Lauren had played dirty. Richard had played dirty. Now it was my turn. A day later, Naomi texted me again. Richard is suspicious. He's checking server logs. I have to lay low. My pulse quickened. He knew someone had accessed his files. He just didn't know who. Yet. I clenched my jaw. We didn't have time to wait anymore. If Richard started locking things down, he could erase everything. It was time to strike. I sat back, my fingers tightening around my phone. This wasn't just an office scandal. This was corporate fraud. If Richard went down, he'd try to take as many people with him as possible, including me. I wasn't going to let that happen. I pulled up Mark's number and typed. We move now? I sat in the dim motel room, the glow from my laptop casting shadows against the wall. The encrypted files Naomi had sent were open on my screen, rows of incriminating emails and financial records filling the space between my thoughts. This wasn't just about getting even anymore. It wasn't about clearing my name. This was bigger. I picked up my phone and called Mark. He answered on the first ring. This is it, he said, his voice sharper, more alive than I'd ever heard. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Yeah, this is it. Mark exhaled. If we do this right, we don't just take down Richard. We expose everything. This could ruin him, and make sure he never does this to anyone else again. I let the words settle. I'd spent so long playing defense, just trying to survive the hits. But now I was the one pulling the strings. We finalized the plan. Mark would contact a journalist, someone who specialized in corporate corruption, someone who wouldn't back down if Richard tried to kill the story. Naomi would leak Richard's expense reports and emails to HR and select board members, ensuring the internal fallout started before Richard even realized what was happening. And me? I would make sure the final blow happened in public, at the company's biggest event of the year. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was the one pulling the strings, and that changed everything. The next afternoon, Mark met with Eleanor, the journalist he had lined up for the story. I waited anxiously for his update, pacing the length of my motel room until the call finally came through. "She's in," Mark said without preamble. I stopped pacing. "How much does she know?" "Everything," he said. "She's seen the files, the messages, the expense reports." His voice darkened. "And Caleb?" "She says if this is real, Richard won't just lose his job. He could face criminal charges." I sat down hard on the edge of the bed. That was bigger than I expected. "Does she need anything else?" I asked. Mark hesitated. "She just needs time. We can't let Richard know what's coming. The story will go live after the event, when he's already trapped." I clenched my jaw. "Then we stick to the plan." Richard thought he was invincible. He was about to learn what it felt like to be powerless. Meanwhile, Naomi was handling her side of things. She had been quiet since our last meeting, but when her message finally came through, my stomach tightened. "It's done. Now we wait." She had submitted Richard's fraudulent financial records to HR and keyboard members under an anonymous report. If they had any sense, they would start digging. I checked my watch. If all went well, the whispers would start spreading by morning. Richard, however, was already growing suspicious. Naomi had warned me that he had started asking questions, trying to figure out who had been poking around. Then, in a stroke of poetic justice, Richard's personal assistant quit without warning. The assistant had been loyal to him for years. If even she was jumping ship, then the iceberg was already visible, and Richard's Titanic was heading straight for it. That night, Richard called Lauren. I didn't have to hear the conversation to know he was nervous, but I did hear from Naomi what he had said. "Something's coming. I don't know what, but I feel it. I need you to be careful." Lauren's response? A careless, "handle it." She was too busy dealing with her own social downfall to realize that this time, Richard wouldn't be able to save either of them. Richard wasn't used to losing control, and soon, he'd have none left at all. The night of the company gala, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie. I hadn't worn a suit since before all of this started. It felt strange, like stepping back into a version of myself I barely recognized. But this wasn't the same me. I wasn't walking into that event as a former employee. I wasn't walking in as Lauren's ex. I was walking in as the man who was about to end this. The plan was simple. Naomi had set up a remote file drop that would project Richard's incriminating emails and financial reports onto the massive event presentation screen. At the same time, Eleanor's article would go live, hitting news outlets and flooding social media before Richard could spin a single word of defense. By the time he realized what was happening, it would be too late. As I straightened my suit, I felt something rare, a sense of calm. Tomorrow night, everything would change. Either Richard fell, or I did. I walked into the grand ballroom, my heartbeat steady despite the weight of the moment. The venue was dazzling, crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, and a sea of people dressed in expensive suits and designer gowns. It was the kind of event I had attended many times before, back when I still worked for this company, back when my reputation was intact. Now I was the outsider. I felt the stares as I moved through the room. Conversations lowered to hushed whispers as people turned, recognizing me. Some expressions were curious, others skeptical. A few held something close to pity. Let them wonder. Across the room, Richard stood near the stage, laughing, shaking hands with executives, completely in his element. He looked confident, powerful, untouchable. Not for long. I spotted Lauren lingering near the bar, a glass of wine in her hand. She wasn't surrounded by people like she used to be. Her once effortless charm was wearing thin. Her circle had shrunk. She had spent so much time in Richard's shadow that now, as his downfall approached, she was left with nothing but an empty drink and fading influence. My phone buzzed. A message from Naomi. "Everything's set. The second Richard starts his speech, the files go live." I exhaled slowly. This was it. The man who tried to destroy me is about to be destroyed in front of everyone he respects. I just have to wait. The CEO stepped onto the stage, smiling at the crowd as he gestured toward Richard. "We owe so much of our success to this man," he said. "A leader, a visionary, someone who truly represents the values of our company. I barely stopped myself from laughing. Richard stepped up to the podium, his usual confidence oozing from every movement. He straightened his tie, smiled at the audience, and began speaking. I glanced toward the AV booth. Naomi was already in position. Then, something shifted in the room. Lauren, who had been bored just moments ago, had spotted me. I watched as realization dawned in her eyes, slow at first, then sharp, like a blade slicing through the fog. She wasn't stupid. She knew me well enough to know that if I was here, something was coming. She moved quickly, stepping toward the stage as if she could stop what was about to happen. Richard continued, oblivious. "This company is built on integrity, on trust, and I am honored to lead by example." I smirked. That was the last lie Richard would ever tell. "Enjoy your moment, Richard. It's the last one you'll have." Naomi pressed the button. The giant screen behind Richard flickered. At first it seemed like nothing, just a glitch, a momentary disruption. But then the image changed. Gone was the corporate logo. In its place, a collection of documents, emails, and financial records filled the massive screen for everyone to see. Expense reports showing company money funneled into Richard's personal accounts. Emails between Richard and senior staff discussing which employees to remove, strategically, quietly. Private messages where Richard laughed about manipulating the board and called certain executives easily controlled. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Conversations stopped. Richard, mid-sentence, froze. His eyes darted to the screen behind him, and I watched as the blood drained from his face. He turned sharply, scanning the room, his mind racing to find an escape, to figure out who had done this. He looked toward the AV booth, then at Lauren, who was backing away now, realizing that whatever I had done, it wasn't just going to take him down. It was going to take her down too. The CEO stood, his expression dark. "Richard," he said, voice tight. "What the hell is this?" Richard stammered, grasping for a response, for control. But there was none left. I took a step forward, standing near the front. When Richard's eyes met mine, I let a slow smile form. "Integrity, huh?" I said. "Looks like your definition is different from the rest of us." For the first time, Richard had no power, and I was finally the one holding the cards. Security moved in. Executives were already whispering, some stepping away from Richard like he carried a contagious disease. Lauren turned, trying to slip out quietly, but she wouldn't get far. There was nowhere left to run. My phone vibrated again. Naomi. "Eleanor just published the article. Richard is trending." I glanced around the room. Phones were lighting up. People scrolling, reading the headlines. It was over. I turned back to Richard, who was still standing there, his mouth opening and closing, but no words coming out. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. I stepped out of the ballroom, leaving behind the stunned silence, the frantic whispers, the shifting alliances of people scrambling to distance themselves from Richard. The cool night air hit my face, sharp and refreshing, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. My phone buzzed. I glanced down. "Naomi? HR is already meeting with the board. Richard is done." I exhaled, letting the words sink in. It was over. Everything he had built, everything he had manipulated and controlled, it was finally unraveling. I should have felt more victorious, maybe even a sense of finality. But something inside me knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. I started walking toward my car, my muscles finally relaxing, until I heard hurried footsteps behind me. Then, a voice I hadn't expected. "Caleb, wait!" I stopped. For a split second, I debated just getting in my car and driving away, leaving her in the wreckage of her own choices. But something made me turn. Lauren stood a few feet away, her expression nothing like the cold, smug woman who had shattered my life. There was no confidence in her stance, no calculated charm in her gaze. She looked afraid. "Please," she whispered, "we need to talk." I should have walked away, but after everything, I wanted to hear what she had to say, just to see how far she'd fallen. Lauren hesitated before stepping closer, glancing around as if expecting someone to drag her away at any moment. "Richard's going to blame everything on me," she said, her voice unsteady. I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't respond. I just stared at her, waiting, watching. She swallowed hard. "I swear, Caleb, I never meant to hurt you. Richard, he told me what to say. He said I had to turn people against you before you could turn them against me. A familiar bitterness twisted inside me. I remembered the texts, the laughter in her messages, the way she had mocked me, enjoyed what she was doing. Now, here she was, trying to rewrite history. "Do you even hear yourself, Lauren?" I asked, my voice quiet but sharp. Her lower lip trembled. "I made a mistake, okay? I thought Richard was going to take care of me. You thought you'd win," I finished for her. She flinched. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry she got caught. Lauren kept talking, her words tumbling over each other as she searched for an excuse that might work. "It was him, Caleb. He played us both. I was under so much stress, I wasn't thinking clearly." Then her voice turned bitter. "You weren't ambitious enough. I wanted more." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You wanted more," I repeated, shaking my head. "Lauren, you destroyed me. You let my own friends betray me. And now, when you're sinking, you want me to pull you out?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't mean, you meant every word." She reached for my sleeve, desperate now. "Caleb, please." I pulled my arm away. "I don't owe you anything." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, her world crumbling, just like she had left me. She always thought she could talk her way out of anything, but this time, her words meant nothing. I got into my car, gripping the steering wheel as I let out a long breath. Buzz. My phone lit up. "Mark," I answered, exhaling. "Yeah?" His voice was smug. "Turn on the news." I pulled up a live stream. Breaking news, CEO. Richard M. resigns amidst corporate scandal. There it was, the beginning of the end. I sat back, watching the screen, listening to the analysts speculate about the fallout, the lawsuits that would follow, the reputations that would burn. It was happening, but I wasn't done yet. Richard was out, but the game wasn't over. Not yet. I sat in my motel room, the TV screen flickering with the latest news update. Richard's resignation was plastered across every channel, journalists dissecting his downfall like vultures circling a fresh carcass. A shocking corporate scandal unfolds as Richard M., former CEO of one of the country's leading firms, steps down amidst allegations of financial misconduct and workplace manipulation. Sources say an internal investigation is underway. It should have felt like victory, but my phone buzzed, cutting through the illusion of relief. Naomi. "Don't celebrate yet. Richard's not going down without a fight." I frowned, unlocking my phone. Another notification popped up, this time from social media. Richard wasn't hiding. He was fighting back. His team was already spinning a new narrative. "These allegations are false. This is nothing more than a coordinated effort to dismantle my career. The so-called evidence has been manipulated by individuals with personal vendettas against me." My stomach tightened. Richard wasn't like Lauren. He didn't panic when things got tough. He thrived in chaos. If we weren't careful, he'd find a way to turn this around. Richard wasn't like Lauren. He didn't crumble under pressure. He thrived in it. If we weren't careful, he'd turn this whole thing around. The next blow came fast. An email from an old coworker, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. "Richard just filed a lawsuit against the company and the board. He's claiming defamation." I cursed under my breath. He was trying to bury the evidence. My phone rang, and I picked it up without thinking. Mark's voice was tense. "This isn't over, Caleb. If Richard gets a judge to suppress our evidence, we're screwed." I pinched the bridge of my nose, forcing myself to think. "He's buying time," I said, "trying to find a way to make this all disappear before it can stick." Mark exhaled. "Then we need to hit him before he can do that." I nodded, my mind racing. One final move. One last undeniable piece of evidence. If we didn't act now, Richard was going to walk away from this. We had him on the ropes, but if we didn't act fast, he'd find a way to slip through our fingers. Naomi agreed to meet me in secret. She was already at the back of the cafe when I arrived, her eyes scanning the room, her fingers drumming anxiously against the table. When I sat down, she didn't waste time. "I have something," she whispered, "but if I hand this over, I'm done at the company." She slid a flash drive across the table. I hesitated. "What's on it?" Her voice was low, but steady. "Everything." I plugged it into my laptop and opened the first file. Internal security footage of Richard pressuring board members, coercing them into decisions that benefited him. emails proving he knew about the financial fraud and helped cover it up. And then, the final nail in his coffin, a recording. Richard's voice, unmistakable, laughing. Careers are meant to be built and destroyed. That's the game. If you can't survive it, you don't deserve to play. I clenched my jaw. Naomi studied me carefully. Are you ready for this? I exhaled. Yeah, it's time to end this. Richard thought he was unstoppable, but even the biggest giants fall. Mark called Eleanor, the journalist, setting the final stage. Are you sure about this? She asked. Because once this goes out, there's no undoing it. Mark glanced at me. I nodded. Do it, he said. Within hours, the news broke. Breaking. New evidence exposes CEO's history of corruption. Secret recordings and financial records leaked. Richard M., accused of orchestrating career sabotage and fraud, faces potential legal action. The board moved fast. The company issued an official statement, cutting ties with Richard completely. Lauren's name surfaced in the scandal. She had stayed quiet for too long, and now she was just as guilty in the public eye. Richard disappeared from the media, his lawyers scrambling to contain the damage. But before he vanished, before his empire crumbled completely, he issued one last statement. This isn't over. I stared at the words, my grip tightening on my phone. Maybe it wasn't, but neither was I. I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating non-stop against the motel nightstand. The glow from the screen filled the dim room, illuminating the cheap wallpaper and the half-empty bottle of water beside me. I rubbed my eyes and grabbed the phone. Dozens of unread messages. My inbox was flooded. Headlines flashed across my notifications. Former CEO Richard M. under investigation for financial misconduct and workplace harassment. Disgraced executive facing potential charges as new evidence emerges. I let my head fall back against the pillow, staring at the ceiling. It was over. Richard was done. The empire he had built on manipulation and fear had crumbled overnight. The damage was permanent. There was no coming back from this. My phone rang. Naomi. I answered, and her voice was a mix of exhaustion and triumph. We did it, Caleb. He's out. HR just announced a full review of company leadership. I exhaled. That was bigger than I expected. So, it's really happening? Oh, it's happening, she confirmed. Executives are cutting ties. Investors are pulling back. No one wants to be associated with him anymore. I let out a dry chuckle. Good. But something gnawed at the back of my mind. Richard was predictable. A cornered animal, yes, but his moves made sense. He fought when he was exposed. He countered with legal threats. He scrambled to control the narrative. Lauren, she was different. She was something else entirely. Richard was ruthless, but predictable. Lauren, she was something else entirely. I scrolled through my phone, searching for her. I expected some sort of reaction from Lauren, some desperate attempt to twist things in her favor. But there was nothing. No Instagram stories playing the victim. No dramatic posts about being betrayed by Richard. No cryptic messages designed to get people on her side. Lauren, the woman who thrived on attention, was silent. A text popped up. Megan, have you heard from Lauren? She's disappeared. Disappeared? I frowned. That didn't sound like Lauren. She didn't just vanish. She didn't accept defeat. I checked her social media again. Still nothing. Her accounts were still active, but there hadn't been a post in days. No updates, no photos, no vague, manipulative captions. Lauren never disappeared. She never walked away. So, if she was silent now, she was planning something. Lauren never admitted defeat. She never ran. So, what was she doing? A knock at the door pulled me out of my thoughts. I grabbed my jacket, instinctively cautious, and cracked it open. Juliana. I hadn't seen her since she warned me about Lauren and Richard's past victims. Her eyes darted around before she stepped inside, her shoulders tense. Something was wrong. I need to talk to you, she said, sitting down. I didn't say anything. I just waited. She let out a slow breath. I should have spoken up sooner, she admitted. Lauren, she played everyone. Me, your friends, the company. I didn't realize how deep it went until now. I stayed quiet, watching her closely. Lauren's panicking, Juliana continued. She's desperate, and desperate people are dangerous, I finished for her. She nodded, I leaned forward. What is she trying to do? Juliana hesitated, biting her lip. Then she whispered, "She's going to turn everything on you." A slow, creeping tension settled in my chest. Of course. This was Lauren's last move, the only move she had left. If she couldn't escape the fallout, she'd redirect it. "She's going to paint herself as the victim," Juliana explained. "She's going to say Richard used her, that she was manipulated into everything, and that I was part of it," I finished coldly. Juliana's silence was confirmation enough. Lauren wasn't running. She was planning her counterattack. Of course, she wasn't running. She was planning her counterattack. My phone buzzed. Another message. Naomi. "We need to talk. Lauren just made a move." I exhaled sharply, gripping my phone tighter. I thought this was over. It wasn't. Lauren was back in the game, and this time, she had nothing left to lose. I drove to the diner faster than I should have, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Naomi's message had been brief, but it didn't need to be long. Lauren had made her move. The moment I stepped inside, I spotted Naomi in our usual booth. She wasn't drinking her coffee. She wasn't even looking at the menu. She was just staring at her phone, her fingers gripping it so tightly it looked like she might snap it in half. I slid into the seat across from her. "What happened?" She didn't say anything at first, just exhaled sharply, then turned her phone around and slid it across the table. I looked down. A headline, bold and glaring, filled the screen. "Former employee accused of workplace harassment and retaliation." My stomach dropped. Naomi's voice was tight, controlled. "She filed a report against you, Caleb. She's accusing you of harassment, stalking. Everything she did to you, she flipped it around." I clenched my jaw, my pulse thundering in my ears. "She's claiming you made her life hell after the breakup, that you've been following her, that you were obsessed." Naomi's fingers twitched as she spoke. She says she was forced to go into hiding because she feared for her safety. I barely noticed my hands curling into fists. I had expected something from Lauren, some last-ditch effort to rewrite the story. But this was beyond what even I had anticipated. I exposed Richard, I took away everything she built, and now she wants me to suffer the same way. The fallout was immediate. Social media exploded with opinions, some siding with Lauren, some questioning the timing of her accusations. A thread on Twitter dissected every detail, some users claiming to see the signs in my past behavior, despite never having met me. Others pointed out how convenient it was that Lauren had stayed silent until now. But it was Megan's post that made my stomach churn. We always knew Caleb had anger issues. It was only a matter of time. The likes and comments rolled in, validating her words. Scott, on the other hand, said nothing. But his silence? That was worse than words. Lauren wasn't just trying to ruin my name. She was trying to make sure I never recovered. She didn't need proof. She didn't need facts. She just needed enough people to believe her before I could defend myself. She doesn't need the truth. She just needs people to believe her long enough for me to be destroyed. I wasn't going to let that happen. Naomi and Mark immediately went to work, pulling up old messages, digging into every corner of Lauren's past. It didn't take long to find patterns. She had done this before, used rumors, played the victim, twisted stories to make sure she always came out on top. Mark contacted former colleagues. Some refused to speak, but others, they knew. They had seen how Lauren operated. Meanwhile, I sat across from my lawyer, who skimmed through the official complaint with a deepening frown. "Her case is weak," he admitted. "No real evidence, but that doesn't mean it won't hurt you." He looked up, locking eyes with me. "If you don't fight back, this will follow you forever." I already knew that. This wasn't just about defending myself. It was about ending this. This isn't just about clearing my name. This is about making sure she never does this to anyone again. That night, I met with Eleanor, the journalist. We drafted everything, a full timeline, the evidence, the contradictions in Lauren's claims, emails, texts, screenshots, and then the final piece, the voice recording. A private conversation Lauren had no idea I had kept. People believe whatever I tell them. That's the fun part. Eleanor read through the post one last time, then looked at me. "You know, once you do this, there's no going back," she warned. "Lauren's done if you hit publish." I stared at the screen. I thought about the past few months, the lies, the betrayal, the isolation. I thought about how easily people had turned against me, how they had never even questioned her. I thought about how many others she had done this to before, and how many she'd do it to next if I didn't stop her. I exhaled and clicked. The truth was out. Now, all I had to do was wait for the fallout. I refreshed the post, my heart hammering against my ribs. The truth was out. For the first few minutes, there was nothing. Silence. Then, notifications flooded my phone. Comments, shares, messages. The first wave of reactions came in fast. Finally, someone exposes her. Too little, too late. Nice try, abuser. I expected that last one. Some people would never believe me, no matter how much evidence I had. Naomi's name lit up on my screen. Naomi. It's spreading. Lauren is losing control of the narrative. I stared at the screen, waiting for her response. Lauren never stayed quiet for long. She always had a counter, a way to twist things back in her favor. But this time, nothing. No dramatic Instagram story. No carefully worded post. No snide, backhanded comments. Nothing. For years, she had controlled the story. Now, for the first time, she couldn't. Then, she snapped. A notification popped up. Lauren had posted a video. I hesitated for a second before pressing play. She was crying. Of course. Mascara-streaked cheeks, voice trembling. She looked straight into the camera, her lips quivering. I never wanted to do this, but I have to tell my truth. She painted herself as the victim, said I was dangerous, that she had feared for her life, that she had no choice but to come forward. Megan was the first to jump in, backing her up. Stay strong, Lauren. We believe you. But this time, it didn't work. People weren't buying it. Because something happened. Someone leaked her past messages. Screenshots surfaced, spreading like wildfire. Messages where she bragged about setting me up, where she mocked me behind my back, where she laughed about how easy it was to manipulate people. And then the final blow. A man I didn't know stepped forward, an ex-boyfriend. I know what Caleb is going through because she did the same thing to me. Lauren's credibility shattered. She built her empire on lies. Now, those same lies were burning it down. The shift was instant. People turned on her. Supporters started deleting their comments, like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Others called her out directly. So, you did this to someone else too? And we're just supposed to believe you now? Then Scott, who had stayed silent through all of this, finally spoke up. I was wrong about Caleb. We all were. I stared at the screen, rereading his words. Megan? Silent. She knew it was over. Lauren started lashing out, arguing in the comments, fighting for control. Then, the final nail in the coffin. A former coworker, someone who had seen everything firsthand, leaked an audio recording. Lauren's voice, clear, cold, calculated. People believe whatever I tell them. That's the fun part. The clip went viral. It was over. She thought she was untouchable, but the internet never forgets. Hours later, I checked her account. Gone, deactivated. Megan and Scott disappeared. No more messages, no more posts, no more damage control. A final text from Naomi. Naomi, you did it. She's done. I put my phone down, exhaling slowly. I didn't feel victory, just relief. Lauren was gone. But was this really the end? I woke up to the familiar buzz of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. Another flood of messages. I rubbed my face and reached for it, blinking against the glow of the screen. The first thing I saw was the headline, Leaked Audio Exposes Lauren W., a history of manipulation and lies. I scrolled down. News outlets had picked it up. Journalists were tearing apart Lauren's carefully curated image. New evidence suggests a pattern of behavior spanning multiple years. Former acquaintances speak out, alleging similar experiences. Her name was trending, for all the wrong reasons. I switched over to social media, half expecting a desperate attempt at damage control. But there was nothing. No posts, no statements, no last-minute justifications. Lauren, for the first time in her life, was completely silent. My phone buzzed again, a text from Naomi. Naomi, she's finished. I let out a slow breath, leaning back against the pillows. For the first time in years, she wasn't the one controlling the narrative, and she had no one left to save her. A sharp knock at the door pulled me out of my thoughts. I frowned, climbing out of bed. It was late, too late for room service. I pulled open the door, and there she was, Lauren. She looked unrecognizable. Her hair was messy, her clothes rumpled. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her usual confident posture was nowhere to be found. I crossed my arms. "What do you want, Lauren?" She hesitated, her lip trembling. "I have nothing left, Caleb." I didn't respond. I lost everything, my job, my reputation, my friends. They all turned on me. She let out a shaky breath. I was scared, Caleb. Richard used me. The company threw me away. I didn't know what else to do. A bitter laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. Even now, she was still shifting the blame, still playing the victim. "Are you here to apologize?" I asked. "Or are you just looking for someone to clean up your mess?" For the first time, her expression faltered. She had expected anger, maybe yelling, a confrontation she could twist into another sob story. What she hadn't expected? Indifference. She always believed she could talk her way out of anything, but not this time. She tried one last time. I need someone. Please." I stared at her. For so long, Lauren had held power over me, over my reputation, over my relationships. But now she was just a person. A broken, selfish, lonely person. I shook my head. "You made your choices, Lauren, and now you have to live with them." She stared at me, the reality sinking in. For the first time, she truly had no one left. I stepped back and closed the door. For the first time in years, I was free. I sat on the edge of my motel bed, staring at the blank wall. No anger, no bitterness, just silence. For the first time, I felt something I never thought I'd get: closure. I grabbed my phone and texted Naomi. "It's over." A few seconds later, she replied, "Naomi, good. Now, what's next for you?" I stared at the words. What was next? For the first time in years, I had a blank slate. The question was, what would I do with it? I sat on the edge of my motel bed, staring at my suitcase. It was still half packed, the same way it had been since the night I walked out of my old apartment. Back then, I hadn't known where I was going, just that I had to leave. Now, everything was different. Lauren was gone. Richard was disgraced. The war was over. And yet, I still felt restless. I exhaled and reached for the zipper, closing the suitcase for the first time since that night. It was time to move forward. For the first time, my future wasn't defined by them. It was mine to create. My phone buzzed. "Naomi, you still in that motel?" she asked. "Not for long," I said, tossing my bag over my shoulder. "Good. Listen, I have an idea." She hesitated for a second before continuing. "Since Richard's downfall, the company's making some major changes. They're looking for people to step up, people with integrity, people who know what it's like to be on the other side of corruption." I frowned, already sensing where this was going. "They want you to come back, Caleb." I let out a sharp laugh. "After everything? I don't know if I want to go back there, Naomi." "Then don't," she said easily. "But don't say no before you even think about it." I hesitated. She had a point. Maybe returning wasn't about proving anything to them. Maybe it was about proving something to myself. Before making any decisions, I knew I had to do one last thing: go back to my old apartment. I wasn't sure why. Maybe for closure. Maybe to remind myself why I had left in the first place. When I stepped inside, it felt small, smaller than I remembered. The walls were empty now, stripped of the decorations, the photos, the memories I once thought would last forever. I walked through the space slowly, taking it in. There were a few things left behind: a sweater I'd forgotten, a movie ticket stub tucked into the corner of a drawer, a book with my handwriting in the margins. I picked up the book, flipping through the worn pages, feeling the weight of what it used to mean. Then, I put it down. Lauren wasn't here anymore, and neither was the version of myself that needed this place. I wasn't here to hold on to the past. I was here to let it go. I walked out without looking back. That night, I called Naomi. "I'll take the job." She didn't even try to hide her excitement. "You won't regret it, Caleb." Maybe she was right. Maybe I wouldn't. Caleb had spent months fighting to get his life back. Now, it was time to build something new. I stood outside the office building, staring at the revolving doors. It felt strange being back. 6 months ago, I walked out of here humiliated. My reputation in shambles, my career on the brink of collapse. Now, I was returning on my own terms. You ready for this? I turned to see Naomi waiting near the entrance, arms crossed, grinning. Honestly, I don't know, I admitted. She smirked. Good, that means it's worth doing. I let out a slow breath, rolling my shoulders, trying to ease the tension that had settled in my chest. Then, without another word, I stepped forward and walked through the doors. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about proving, to myself, that I could rise above everything. The office felt different now. Richard was gone. Lauren was a bad memory. But some things hadn't changed. Whispers, stolen glances, people unsure how to treat me. Naomi led me through the hall, past familiar faces that quickly looked away when I made eye contact. It didn't bother me the way it once had. She stopped in front of a door. My name was on the plaque outside, my office. It wasn't massive, but it was mine. She tossed a folder onto my desk. First meeting in an hour. I flipped it open. The name on the first page made my stomach tighten. Scott, I muttered. Naomi watched me carefully. Yeah. I ran a hand through my hair. Scott. One of my oldest friends. One of the first people to turn on me. Do I really need to deal with this today? Probably not, she admitted. But you can't avoid it forever. She wasn't wrong. I sat down, fingers drumming against the desk, my thoughts already spiraling. The past had a way of catching up, but maybe this time I was ready. Scott walked in like a man carrying regret on his shoulders. He sat across from me, shifting uncomfortably. He wasn't smug. He wasn't defensive. For the first time, he looked like he knew exactly how badly he had messed up. I owe you an apology, he said. I leaned back, crossing my arms. You think? He sighed, rubbing his hands together. I got caught up in everything. Lauren made it easy to believe what she said. I didn't want to see the truth. I watched him carefully. There was no excuse that could undo what had happened, but there was something else in his expression. Guilt. Real guilt. And for the first time, I realized something. Holding on to resentment wouldn't fix anything. I took a deep breath. I don't need an apology, Scott, I said finally. I just need to know you won't let someone manipulate you like that again. Scott swallowed hard, then nodded. I won't. Maybe we'd never be best friends again, but at least we weren't enemies. Forgiveness wasn't about letting someone off the hook. It was about letting go of the weight. That night, I sat in my new apartment, watching the city lights flicker through the window. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about Lauren, or Richard, or the past. I was thinking about me. My phone rang. Naomi. You survived your first day? Barely, she laughed. Good. You're not done yet. I smiled, shaking my head. Maybe she was right. Maybe this wasn't the end of the story. Maybe it was just the beginning. Caleb had spent months reclaiming his life. Now, it was time to live it. I woke up to sunlight streaming through my apartment window. For months I had woken up to chaos, betrayal, revenge, uncertainty. Every morning had felt like another battle, another fight to prove something. But today felt different. I stretched, letting the quiet settle around me. No missed calls, no urgent texts, no headlines with my name in them. Just a new day, a normal day. I made coffee and stepped onto the balcony, letting the cool morning air fill my lungs. The hum of the city below was steady, predictable. For the first time, I wasn't running from something. I was just here. This was my life now. Not a battle, not a war, just mine. I spent most of the morning clearing out my inbox, work emails, company memos, and then I saw it, an email from Lauren. My stomach twisted, but I didn't feel anger or fear, just hesitation. Did I even want to open it? Curiosity won. Caleb, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if you'll read this, but I wanted to say something I never said before. I'm sorry. I exhaled slowly, reading on. I let my ambition and my ego destroy the best thing I ever had. I see that now, and I know it's too late. I won't bother you again. I just needed you to know that. I stared at the screen for a long moment. It was the closest thing to closure she was ever going to give me. But closure wasn't something she could give me. I had already found it myself. I hovered over the reply button. Then, slowly, I hit delete. No response, no second chances. She was finally gone, and I was finally free. That evening, I met Naomi for dinner, our first real conversation outside of work. She raised an eyebrow as I sat down. "So, are you going to turn into a full-blown corporate guy now?" I smirked. Not a chance." She grinned, sipping her drink. Then, after a pause, she studied me for a moment. "You seem different. Lighter." I thought about that. I guess because I am. And I meant it. The past wasn't a weight on my shoulders anymore. It wasn't something I needed to carry. For the first time, I wasn't living in response to what had been done to me. I was living for myself. Maybe, for the first time, I was choosing happiness. As I walked home that night, the city lights flickering above me, I felt something unfamiliar, excitement for the future. I had spent so much time looking back, chasing justice, proving people wrong. Now I was just living. Caleb's story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming himself, and he had finally done it. Life isn't about the people who betray you. It's about the strength you find in yourself after they're gone. I spent months chasing justice, proving people wrong, thinking that revenge would make me whole. But in the end, it wasn't about them. It was about me, about reclaiming my life, my future, and choosing happiness over resentment. Because real strength isn't in the fight. It's in knowing when to move forward. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever had to rebuild after losing everything, you're not alone. Let's keep sharing, learning, and growing together. Subscribe for more stories that remind us all. We are stronger than the storms we survive.